Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. How about yourself?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good.
It's I think we last had you involved. I think it was back in September. We've had you in this online capacity a few times. How's things since then? A bit more light at the end of the tunnel now.
Yeah, I think we've got a roadmap, haven't we? But an ambiguous roadmap, but it's still a roadmap. So I think there is light at the end of the tunnel for many of us.
Yeah, definitely, it's good stuff, and it's a pleasure to have you back with us. Thanks for joining. And I think it's actually the first time we've had you back in this kind of capacity, where rather than navigating through some slides and presenting in that fashion, I think we're gonna hit you with some questions in and around kind of pandemic response, looking beyond the pandemic. So looking forward to kind of picking up on some of your insights with that.
Sure. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Good stuff. So let's get right into it, I guess. And for those of you just joining, this is the first element of today. We're into a fireside chat, and we're with Tariq, who's digital product lead for Legal and General. I'll probably just hand it over to you for a quick intro on yourself, Tariq, because you're probably in a better position than myself to give a few pointers and keys on who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So brief summary. I'm Tariq Maonah. I'm the digital product lead at Legal and General. At Legal and General, just to give you a bit of background before we go into the more detailed chat, is a financial services firm focusing on a whole range of financial services products, from pensions, investments, insurance. But we also are a homes builder. We also do construction, which many people don't know about us, but we are one of the largest builders of homes in the UK. And in a way, it's all connected into your financial ecosystem. So we look after you throughout your life at those moments that matter. It's a great role, I think, in the product space. There's so many products available at Legal and General, and for me, the main challenge is really focus on consistency of experience, but also bringing employees the same level of experience that we bring our customers.
Nice, really good. So I think we're going to start the conversation around kind of strategy. It's been a talking point particularly on this series, over the past few months. A lot of kind of rewriting rules, revisiting strategy again and again. I think, with uncertainty and clear, unclear direction from kind of the government and things, it's been very difficult for businesses to plan and, strategize and get kind of ourselves away from pandemic mode. In your role, you have a kind of a responsibility for a certain degree of strategic transformation. And like I said, I think the pandemic has torn up the rule book, so to speak, for a lot of organizations on how they approach things, and their strategy must have changed. How much of your own strategy and approach have you had to change in your role, and have you had to change your strategy? So I think that's a good place to start, perhaps.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, first of all, there's a big shift going on in the way we see strategic views. In somewhere like financial services, where we're quite traditional in a sense, once you put a strategy out there, it's almost quite hard. There's a bit of fear to then turn that strategy around. It's almost a fear of turning the tanker almost around. So there is a bit of a cultural element there when it comes to strategic initiatives, but you should really treat your strategy, and I treat my strategy here, whether it's to do with digital workplace or employee experience, is to really see it as a product. So when you look at a strategy, it's a living and breathing thing. It's not just something you cement and carve into stone and it's just immovable. It should be something that you look at very regularly and you fine tune. The way we see strategy is that it's part of team cohesion. If everyone isn't on board with the strategy, you're not going to have a high performing team. You need everyone on board, and you need to have that discussion up front. Get the debate going about the strategy and get to a place where everyone's comfortable with it, and ultimately it's serving the customer. So yes, we had a very, I would say, visionary North Star. It's always good to have something that's really far out there, not something as immediate, but the North Star won't change as much because that's where you want to get. It could be years away, but the way we deliver has changed, I think, because of the nature of the pandemic and the way we deliver our strategy. That's been the biggest change for me. How we deliver it, the North Star hasn't changed as much.
That's good. Again, that's echoes quite a good sentiment that's been discussed before, about particularly with regards to North Star. I think I've heard that term used quite a lot, about finding your North Star and determining what that is. And like you say, it doesn't have to be an immediate goal or objective. It's, set into the future. And if you can work towards, backwards from that, then it's kind of the best way to go from now. So really good point. And within that, you touched on that cultural side of strategy. And obviously, you've experienced it a lot with us. We talk about people and culture on this event, heaps, more so sometimes than the actual technology or digital tools and technologies. Your role is heavy focus on kind of that cultural transformation as well. You've alluded to it quite a few times in the past on your presentations, and it's obviously one of the key parts to digital business transformation. How has kind of those needs and requirements changed within organizational culture in recent times? So kind of looking at, and we've talked to death about kind of remote work and siloed work and things like that over the pandemic, but it really is kind of a big issue still for a lot of organizations, and particularly still as we move on beyond the pandemic. How have you found this? Has it been difficult? How have you coped? And we were talking about light at the end of the tunnel. How do you see things playing out?
Yeah, I think if you go into a tech or transformation role in any organization and you don't see culture as something that is your accountability, then you're already setting yourself up for failure, because transformation is intrinsically linked to culture. You can't do one without the other. So it's part of your responsibility, even if it's not on your job spec, so to speak, to kind of influence cultural change, because that's the only way you're going to get transformation. Because if you kind of take it back to its bare bones, transformation and change, it really rocks the boat on psychological safety for many people, and you need to create that psychological safety even through an ambiguous time. And what we've been going through is quite ambiguous for sure, and the future is ambiguous for many. But what it's really shown, and I think has exposed corporate and company culture publicly, so you are starting to see those who have a competitive advantage in the culture space, but also organizations are now starting to see the benefits of actually focusing on culture, because we're coming out of this now in terms of a roadmap. I know we've got a long way to go in terms of the pandemic response, but we are starting to see the job market pick up. It's a massive war on talent at the moment in terms of data scientists, digital skills, change leadership skills. Where are those people going to go in this market? They're going to go to people culturally where they feel like there's opportunity, where they're getting choice, where they're feeling there's authenticity there. So it's really important in a cultural transformation to understand how it links to your talent acquisition strategy. And that's all part of any business transformation. And I think key to that transformation culture has been internal communications as well. So if you didn't already have an internal comms function or a strategy, you probably have developed one. If you haven't developed one, then this is the time to develop one. You really need to be talking frequently to your people, but also you need to create two-way communication. We had a very parent-child way of communicating in the past. It was very much employer speaking to employee. That's moved a lot since we started a transition before the pandemic, but the pandemic accelerated it, where we were really on the level with employees, authentically getting their feedback and making changes based on that feedback. It's really important. And also what I mentioned, that ambiguity there is an opportunity to bake growth mindset into your culture. You really need that growth mindset if you want to be successful coming out of this. That really comfortable with ambiguity and shaping change and changing direction it's all opportunities for growth. So all of those need to be baked into whatever transformation you're doing. And it's difficult because you're going to have people that really do not gel with that, and you're going to have people that fly in that, and the ones that don't gel with it, you're going to have to take them on a journey, and you're going to have plans in place, frameworks in place to deal with those communities who are maybe needing more of a nudge or more of a safe environment to thrive in, essentially.
Sure, no, that's a really good answer, and it leads us on to the kind of the next quite nicely as well, with regards to kind of that change management, that continuous improvement, coming down to exceptional communication and leadership. But with that, it's very hard to kind of, we've probably evolved a lot over the last 12 months and learned a lot about leading and communicating, but it's still very difficult. We're working in our homes with our family around us, and it's hard to kind of switch off and things like that. And then focusing on leading a team, every single day, Monday to Friday, throughout. How have you kind of managed through the pandemic and continuing to do so with regards to communication and leadership? You mentioned about the tools needed to kind of communicate, but do you have any other kind of proven methods of leading your team during these difficult times, particularly in your role?
Definitely. I think there was always a bit of a debate even before. Transformations is a big part of leadership, and transformation go hand in hand, essentially. But I'm a big advocate of servant leadership, and I think in this particular day and age we're in now, and the way we are distributed, servant leadership lands really well, because it really creates that putting your team first, empathizing with them, coming up to a shared responsibility, but then delivering value together. So sservant leadership, I think, is the basis of a successful future in this hybrid model. People could disagree with that, but I think it's worked very well during this time. But also part of it is devolving that decision making. So if you take the way you ran your team before hybrid working, before remote working, and you are still the bottleneck, or you're still that point at the top of your team where you're basically the decision maker, then that is not going to scale. You're not going to be able to scale your team like that, and you're not going to be able to deliver value. So one thing you have to really do is start looking at how you spread that decision making across your business, or giving more autonomy to your team. It's really important. A lot of people think that you need to be face to face all the time and having synchronous chats or synchronous communication. But when you look at the theory behind it, and I actually studied this at university, so it's uncanny that we're going through this many years ago, but asynchronous communication, where it's not real time, is actually where high performing teams thrive. So your team, you don't always have to be face to face with them, although it's good to, you should definitely have that time, but you need to be able to pick up communications off sync with each other, make decisions when you're not in sync with each other. And that's really important as well, especially now when you look at the future. We might not all be having teams that are based in London or Cardiff or in the UK. You might have globally distributed teams, which many of you probably do, and you can't make real-time decisions. So you need to kind of devolve the way you make decisions and get comfortable with speaking asynchronously.
And is that something that you kind of just have to learn as a kind of a leadership skill? Because it's like you say, it's very difficult sometimes to kind of pick up on messages. We often misinterpret an email, or even in our social lives, a text message can be read in the wrong kind of way. So how can people that perhaps not pick up on those signals and make difficulty with interpreting things, how can they kind of go on to learn a bit more about that? Do you have any kind of recommendation?
That's a good question, Chris, because I mean, at Legal in General, we picked up on that quite early on in the first lockdown, and we had a whole series focused on leaders at all levels. You could have been a first-time line manager, you could be a senior manager, and it was all about thriving in this situation. So we saw that, as an opportunity to teach our leaders, because those were those are the communities that it's make or break, essentially. Everyone's going to look to their leaders for that. I do think there are things you can learn, but there's a lot of frameworks you can put in place. So principles. So when it comes to decision making, if you and your team have a really cohesive strategy, but also understand the way you make decisions and have a set of principles to making decisions, then you've also given that autonomy, but also kept the quality of decisions being made. So you don't always have to feel like you're, if you're not in the loop in a decision, or you're not in sync with someone's progress. If they're sticking to those principles, then in theory you should be okay, and you should trust what they're doing. So a lot of it, I mean, I would go back to those 12 principles of agile, and look at that if as a first port call, but also a high performing team theory remotely. There's lots you can read on that. But as an organization, I think it's organizational duty to help give leadership that remote effectiveness. And if that's not already in place, then try and question that within your organization.
Nice, that's a really good answer. Thanks, Tariq. And then going kind of back to change management in part, digital transformation has kind of a high failure rate, with business leaders getting the execution often wrong, and analysis and reading around kind of the subject suggests that in part change management fails, and this is down to kind of outdated models which don't meet the needs of a dynamic business environment. How essential is it to continue to evolve models and obviously replace? We talk a lot about replacing legacy systems, and not just legacy systems, thinking as well. How important is it moving forward to kind of change the models to better suiting customers or better suiting employees?
Yeah, I think this is a big question, Chris. But you're right. There's a lot
in the morning as well.
Haven't had my cup of tea yet. Yes, no, I think you're right. I think what we find in digital transformation as a whole is it's not really set up for test, learn, and fail, and then improve. You don't get that opportunity to fail. So when you do go into a transformation and you set this, this target, you're probably doing it tech-led to start with. You might be thinking, right, I'm getting a new shiny cloud system, but then it's going to fall off a cliff because, first of all, you're not factoring in that people have to learn how to use this system. Then people's ability to learn on top of everything else they're doing, there's going to be a massive dip there. So adoption features into it as well. And that's why I think personally, there's been quite a high failure rate. It's because you might deliver the right thing, but whether people use it or whether people adopt it and that process is another bag completely. I think also we need to be more cross-functional in nature. What we have done and in what we've learned in this pandemic response, but going forward, is transformation can't happen in isolation. It needs to be cross-functional. And even if you are doing transformation in isolation, you need to make sure that it does connect across the business. You need to make sure that what you're doing is not going to lead to more bolt-ons across the business. It's really important that the transformation you're doing is a catalyst for other teams as well. It can't just be something you're doing in silo. So it's trying to be more incremental, I would say, rather than big bang. And it's still a problem because, you might start with something very agile and it turns into something very big bang. But you have to ask yourself across the whole time you're doing this transformation am I solving the problem we started with? Or am I just delivering something? And they're two very different statements, and we often get lost in the technical details of delivery. But are we actually solving the problem we began on this journey to do? So it does, it's a really difficult thing. Obviously, it's been going on for quite a while, but really, in terms of thinking, it really needs to move into small change quickly and solving a problem that's really core to employees or the customers.
Sure. No, again, that's a really good answer. We had our North American event last week, and I was speaking to head of strategy from Samsung, and he was saying there's a lot of focus on, we kind of touched on emerging technology, and he was making the point of, we're obsessed with shiny new tech and bringing it in fast and, trying to get it delivered quickly when we should be focusing on the now. There's too little focus on what's happening right now, what we need right now versus, what's on that hype cycle and what businesses are going to be looking forward to, in the future. So it's a really good point that we need to, just focus in the now and see what we need now and deliver that, slowly and carefully, throwing everything at it.
Yeah, and it's also that whole, you taking everyone on that journey, and we often forget the communities that are affected. And if you're not, communication strategies during transformation tend to happen at the beginning and then the end when it's about to launch, rather than incrementally throughout the journey. You know, are you getting feedback from those communities? Are you actually driving that? That's quite critical, I think, in a transformation.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We're always coming back to that of communication and that side of it, so it's good. And then with digital change management, it's kind of often defined in 4 key areas: prepare, define, design, build, and verify being the last point. How do you best plan change in your own experience, and how can leaders get off to that best possible start? So, you know, when we're at the start point, perhaps of a kind of a change management project or digital transformation journey.
Yeah, I think this ties in quite well to the previous question, actually, because it's all about being very experience led. When I start change, I always start by looking at, this is the now. This is where, you know, this is how we're focused now. I may have done lots of UX research, customer research, to understand what are the pain points, what are we actually facing, where the friction in the business or externally or internally, and then really going through that experience-led approach and starting to tie all of the technical things we need to do right back to those problem statements. So it's not just about technical delivery here. We're saying that this technical delivery actually leads to this change in experience, and therefore turning it back into either a productivity gain or a return on investment gain. So you need to really have that very set from the beginning, really very clear from the beginning, and also coming up with a shared set of principles. So you have the prepare, define, design, you know, all of those things you mentioned there, build and verify. Those are all great stages, but throughout all of it, you need to make sure you've got a core set of principles that you adhere to. They could be design principles, they could be the principles in how we deliver, the principles how we make decisions. You know, all of those things need to be upfront across the group that are involved, or cross-functional group, need to be ironed out and agreed on. I think you get into a lot of noisy situations in that change process when you haven't agreed those principles up front, and then it can be very subjective. A lot of change can be subjective, so you need to really make sure you have those principles ironed out and everyone understands what it means to them personally in their roles.
Sure. And just quickly on those principles as well, have you ever had it where you've experienced, you know, like a derailment on those principles, you know, and there's been, you've kind of moved away from it, or someone's moved away from it? How do you kind of come back to it? Or do you kind of consistently and every day or every week kind of, you know, how are we achieving this and how are we meeting this, and kind of revisit those principles? What happens if it goes off track?
Yeah, I mean, it often does. I mean, let's be real, you know, you're going to have so many stakeholders with different mindsets, different ways of working, and, you know, the principles often, something they want the product to do or something they want the change to do is really off-piste of what those principles are. And the great thing about having principles is that you can tie it back to value, you can tie it back to experience. Otherwise, it's just a subjective, you know, disagreement between two people. We always use the principles to say how is bettering the employee or the customer, and that way you can take that individual back to say, you know, by doing it your way, for example, or making that change, how are we bettering that experience, or how are we actually solving the problem? It might be something that solves the problem in a smaller way than what we are trying to achieve. And then if you can't get to agreements on things, we always try to go down the data route as well. It's really key to include deep data in all of your change and decision making. And if it isn't something that we can have data on straight away, if we release something, we're always up to doing some testing on the two options and making sure one of them is correct. So there are ways you can go around it, but your life is so much more easier if you tie your principles back to the problem statements.
Nice. That's really good. We've had a few questions coming in from the audience, so if we're So thanks to Andrew Davis for this. Tariq, have you found your teams to be more or less productive now they've moved to working from home or hybrid office homework practices?
I think I think the productivity's not gone down. I would say that we're productive in different ways and work gets done in different ways. But we're still churning out a lot of work. I think that the issue is you start going into a phase where everything seems critical. And as a manager, you need to make sure you're not just your team's just not overloaded with churning stuff out, and that stuff is meaningless. So it's really important to look at the work you're doing regularly and understand, is it, high value? Are we actually making wins here, or are we doing thankless to meaningless tasks that are just not getting us anywhere? So you have to keep re-anchoring and recentering your team to make sure that you are performing and doing valuable tasks. But this all comes back down to that synchronicity. You might not be doing the work between 9 and 5, or some people might be doing it on the weekend or in the, it's their choice. You would have to do what's best for your team. And if some people want to work on a weekend and maybe not work half a day when there's no meetings during the week, that's fine, as long as you're getting the work done. So less micro and more looking at the bigger picture over a period of time, we are still getting work done for sure.
Nice. And you moved from that micro to where you're at now, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. It was very, I think in the office culture, it was very hard to be the way we are now, and have that fluidity. And I think this has definitely enabled that fluidity. So even going back to when we go back to offices or hybrid, I think we'll still maintain that fluidity.
Yeah, nice. And then another one in from Dawn Hunter. Thank you, Andrew, for that one. Tariq, how do you ensure continued buy-in from leadership for digital transformation projects, particularly when remote working compromises the visibility of the project?
Visibility is a big, it's a fear, I think, in this remote world. And there's this presenteeism that happens. Over presenteeism almost, trying to communicate. But really, you need to form a very compelling narrative for your transformation. Transformations are about telling a story. And if you haven't got that big picture story in place and you aren't publicizing that story, then transformation does fall off a cliff a little bit. So definitely revisit your overall narrative, make sure it's compelling, make sure it fits in with the way we're working right now. If not, you might have to make changes to it and then get that in front of the right audiences. It might not be immediate audiences. You might have to go cross-functionally and start discussing that, loop in with people who are making change. I'd advise definitely go where the momentum is. The momentum may have dropped in your area, for example, but there might be momentum building another area of the business. How does your strategy link in with that area? Are you able to then communicate with that area where there is momentum and really try and sell your transformation as well? So it's really about finding those areas of the business where there is energy, because right now that's changing very rapidly.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Thanks. And thanks, Dawn, for asking. And one more in here there's a lot of focus around remote work, as you can imagine. John Mobbs here. How are you ensuring you are managing and monitoring your employees' well-being and mental health, especially with the increase in remote working? And obviously there's a lot of focus right now on this and things. So what's your take on that one?
Yeah, it's a really big one. I mean, I'm a massive mental health advocate. I was a mental health assistant in the NHS for many years myself, so I'm familiar with it. But I think we use, there's technologies we use at Legal & General. We use apps, an app called Unmind. That's a platform that goes out to individuals. We do a lot of value thinking time, and this might sound like work value thinking, but it's really a time for teams as well to come together and stop doing the day-to-day, take some time out and think about, if we could do things better, how would we do it? How are things going in your day-to-day life? How are things going socially for you? We always make sure, even in any meeting you have, there should be an element of social in your meeting. So if you're booking meetings for an hour, 10 minutes of it should be a bit of social interaction as well, and make sure you've got clear objectives for your meeting. But don't think of it as well-being being something that you do once a week, or it has to be continuous. It needs to be baked into your team. So there needs to be that culture where you can talk openly if you've got issues, or you're worried about your well-being. There's times in any time of the day, in any of your meetings as a team, where you can discuss that. So that's really, really important. And obviously you have to keep reminding as a leader to take breaks, to check in with your peers, but also check in with your family. We're very good on reiterating that at Legal and General. I think is well-being is really something we're quite strong at, and I think it's important to not underestimate the power of just reiterating focus on well-being. Don't make it a drop in the ocean once, infrequent chats. It should be baked into the way you run your team.
Nice, good answer, and thanks, John, for asking. It's really important area that we like to touch on at the event as well, and thanks for answering that so well, Tariq, as well. Got time for one more quick question, so just to round it off, and it's a big question, but we're a bit pushed for time, so maybe a concise answer on how you see the future of work looking. And it's another one of those big questions, and it's probably too early in the morning for thinking about that. But how do you see kind of the next 2-3 years playing out with regards to resuming work life?
Yeah, I think if we look at the big picture, I mean, Microsoft, if you haven't watched Ignite over the last few days, I recommend you do, because that's a glimpse into the future. They're right there. And I think we always thought mixed reality might be a future. It might play well in some industries and not, but we're getting to a point where the future is going to be, no matter where you are, the level of consistency and experience is the same. And that's a critical flaw right now. You don't have to go and buy, augmented reality tech and all of that to do it. But what you need to do in the future, and I think the future of work is going, is where if I'm sitting at home or in a coffee shop or whatever, in an office, I'm have the same level of contribution and experience in a meeting or in a workshop as anyone else. And that's right now is the flaw. So at a very basic level, we're going to make sure that consistency of contribution is the same, and no matter what the tech is for that.
Nice. Well, I could talk to you for a few more hours about a lot of different things, but unfortunately that's all we got time for. It's been a real pleasure to have you this morning, and thanks for kicking off the day. And really been great to grab those insights from you, and some really interesting points, and glad we were able to answer those questions that came in from the audience there. So thank you again, Tariq. It's always a pleasure to have you with us, and hopefully we'll see you. I mean, I think I did say this last time, but hopefully we'll have you back on a physical stage pretty soon. It's looking more likely this time round, but we just never know. But hopefully some point soon. You keep on doing your good work, and we'll catch up again at another point.
Cheers, Chris. Thank you.